All right. Well, welcome to our first panel, first quarter, a deep bench, elite athletes in the expanding marketplace for sports technologies. We're really excited to have a wonderful set of panelists here today. Down at the end, we have Sean Hulls, the sports science coordinator from the Philadelphia Eagles. We have Meredith Unger, who is a graduate of Harvard Business School and currently at the Launch Lab here in our ecosystem. And we also have Dr. Leslie Saxon of the USC Center for Body Computing, as well as Sandra Lopez from Intel. And our moderator is Angela Ruggiero from the Sports Innovation Lab. So really excited to get started. One thing I want to say as we kick this off, when the panel ends, if everyone could exit to my left into the iLab, it makes it a lot easier for the rotation. So appreciate it. Thanks so much. Take it away, Angela.
Thanks, Jody, and welcome once again. I am extremely honored to have this group to kick off officially the Quantified Athlete. It's really exciting to take a look at who they are. They've been specifically picked because they're not just representing one slice of the business. We're here to talk about the expanding marketplace, and that's at obviously different levels. So I want to ask each one of the panelists to give us a brief description of what you actually do. I think having that context will really enrich the conversation because they're very impressive individuals, and again, we're so excited to have you. So maybe Sandra Lopez, who's here, flew in for this event at Intel. Can you just maybe explain a little bit about what you're trying to do inside of Intel with wearables and fashion and tech, and walk us through a little bit about why you believe this market is so important to the industry?
Yeah, so great to be here. I'm Vice President General Manager of Human Performance within the Intel Sports Group. And I think it's really important within Intel, we have a business unit. And what that means is we are creating and designing and engineering products by the athlete, for the athlete, by the fan, for the fan. So it's from ground up. It's not like we're taking a platform from our other business units and saying, let's figure out how we apply that to sports and apply a sponsorship. And so by doing so, in terms of engineering products for the entire sports ecosystem, we have a firm commitment to partner with the entire sports industry, which is why we're here, and really listening to the conversations and opportunities that everybody presents. And so we get super excited about solving some of the most complex problems. And so if you hear our CEO, Brian Kersanich, he'll sit there and talk to the various leagues and athletes. It's like, bring us your most complex problem, and we as engineers are going to solve it. So excited to be here, excited to be part of the conversation and share a little bit more about what Intel's doing as we go through the conversation.
Great, thank you. Dr. Leslie Saxon, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the USC Center for Body Computing. I had the chance to visit it about a month ago, and it's just an exceptional place to learn more, but maybe you can tell the audience a little bit about what you've been doing for years and a bit about your background as well.
Sure, thanks for hosting a Trojan here at Harvard, and thank you, Angela and Isaiah. We like our chances on the playing field a lot, but academically we like our chances too. But it's a pleasure to be here, and I hope for more collaboration. But I'm an interventional cardiologist by training and career, really. Sudden cardiac death in the athlete and sudden cardiac death is sort of my specialty, implant defibrillators and other take care of arrhythmia issues. But so I know sensors very well, implantable sensors. And when I moved to SC from UCSF, got very interested because of our 700 elite athletes and kind of quantifying them and trying to figure out some performance, resiliency, injury prevention, the usual. Started this innovation center that deals with kind of the entire health of the athlete and also the elite warfighter from from when they're sick or injured, but trying to back it up way before. And I can tell you, so we do studies, largely sensor-driven, behavioral, other studies in athletes, and we're really committed to getting serial measures on the athletes and doing real science. I can tell you as a clinician scientist with an academic career in cardiology that there's a huge gap between performance science and regular clinical science. There are many things in regulated medicine that performance science needs to adopt because it just hasn't kept pace, from the sensor analytics and a lot of things. The second thing is it's enormously difficult to do research in this area with elite athletes in particular, or collegiate athletes, because everything is against you representing the interests of the athlete. just the structure of the organizations prevents really serious, rigorous science. It's very difficult to test one thing all the way through. There's a penalty for disclosure, which is enormously inhibitive. And there are all sorts of forces against really representing the interests of the athlete, in some cases the warfighter. So we work a lot on those governance issues because it's kind of a cluster now. It's a free-for-all. And the Wild West is really good to a certain point because it allows a lot of freelance innovation. But when it really comes down to saying, this is going to be expensive, does it work? Is this real that's coming off this athlete? Is this a real biometric? First of all, if it's not, what are you doing? And if you can't open it up to me so I can see if it's real, what are you doing as a business? And the second thing is it safe? Because it's basically protected health information. And is it going to represent the best interests of that player, which is what we try to be about, and I assume you do. But that gets very messed up pretty quickly in the current age. So we're also, as much as we're doing science, we're working on all those issues, trying to work with players association leagues and figuring that out. And the same thing exists in traditional medical care, but it's kind of amplified, I think, in athletics right now.
Thank you. And then Meredith, maybe you can talk a bit about your company, Nix, just so everyone's familiar, a hydration sensor for endurance athletes, and kind of how you're seeing the market in that space.
Yeah, thank you. So as Jody mentioned earlier, I'm an alum of Harvard Business School, and my background's actually in venture capital and venture creation. So I'm really coming at the sports tech industry from the perspective of building sustainable businesses and growing them scalably. So the company that we're working on, I'm the founder CEO of Nix. We're using single-use wearables to give access to athletes to information about their hydration strategy and their hydration status in real time, so that they can use that data to optimize their safety and performance on the field of play across all sports and all levels of play. That's something I feel really passionately about. I know, there's wonderful influencer strategies that come from the elite levels of athletes, but the real value to build a sustainable, scalable business is going to be getting access to that data and bringing that value proposition to a scalable level.
Great, thanks. And finally, Sean, sorry you're the only guy in the panel. Usually it's the other way around in these kinds of conferences. I feel you. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your role as the Director of Performance for Philadelphia Eagles, and also how you've, with your prior work with the Navy SEALs and how that all comes together.
Yeah, I think a lot of the quantified athlete approach for me personally started with SEAL teams, just because we didn't have the same kind of feedback loops that you have in sport with wins and losses based on operations and things like that. Wins are usually just guys coming back safe, but guys still trying to maximize and push the boundaries of human performance consistently for year in, year out over a long career, 20-year career in the military. And what we found there, especially when I first was there, like it was over 60% of our orthopedic injuries were coming from training itself, not even being at war. So that's where the quantification of the external loads and internal loads on the individuals, the psychological load, the cost to fighting this war for this long was impactful, and how we used data to help answer some of those questions. And then coming to the Philadelphia Eagles was as an extension to some of that work from the military, bringing that to the NFL with a very similar goal, mindset, maximizing the individual health and performance of each athlete on the field. And then also with the various technologies that have available to us now with the RFID systems and things like that to interrogate that data from a technical and tactical advantage, using it both in scouting and our coaching staff.
Great. So you guys can see it's a really interesting panel, a lot of different perspectives. We have a startup, we have sort of a big tech, we have a university, we have someone deep in the players side. They're coming at the expansion of this market from obviously different angles. So the first question I have is, how have you guys seen the market for sports tech, specifically wearables, and evolve over time? And maybe just to kick it off, you could tell us where we're coming from. I think that's always interesting. Like, how quickly has this market evolved? We talk a lot about this pie in the sky, this predictive performance, but are we expanding at the right pace, and maybe what you see in the near future?
I mean, I can take it from an Intel perspective. We're looking at the market. There's about 1,600 sports technology companies in the latest number that we've gathered. And so it's accelerated at a very fast rate. And what's happening, I mean, we all hear these numbers. You wear a wearable, you put it in your drawer, and you don't use it again. And so, you guys talked about it earlier when you guys were doing your keynote. It's, well, what do you do with the data and the whole predictive analysis? And data is going to come from multiple sources, right? So it's structured, unstructured, it's video, it's natural language. And where I think people really needs to start to focus on, and so wearables are going to continue to mature, sensors are going to continue to advance, but artificial intelligence and cognitive learning and being able to make sense of that data, and you guys said it earlier, it's about real time. So we know, live in game and decision making becomes really important. And so if you're going to be relying on the data, Intel has a huge commitment about how do you make that data accurate. There's a lot of bad data out there in terms of accuracy and reliability. And if you are actually making a decision with regards to an athlete and possibly risking their contract, we're really committed to how's the data accurate, reliability, and predictive insights. So we're already starting to see significant movement in this space. And so I would say artificial intelligence is an area that people should start to focus on. The wearable tech industry is very fragmented. It's going to start to consolidate. It happens in the tech industry. You'll see multiple startups. It's really hard, and we know this. We've done this multiple times. You can create a prototype, but taking it to mass consumers is a very different thing. And so I ask people, when you're looking at wearable technology, making a decision for your team or league or organization, be very thoughtful of what are you trying to solve? Is it solving it? And could they actually drive to mass commercialization? And that becomes really important. And then think about the R&D, right? So it takes version 1, version 2, and version 3. And this is why our standpoint is, you need a technology company that's willing to invest significant dollars in research and development and partner with the sports industry to bring these solutions to life. So I would say keep an eye on artificial intelligence. That's the next big thing.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to talk about the market and how they've seen it evolve through time?
I think it's still incredibly fragmented, not there. It's like, I know we're in 10 years, I think it's a minimally invasive implantable, maybe some player tracking, different software packages, and some governance around the data. But in the near term, it's a bunch of companies with largely unproven product, a lot of hyperbole, venture-backed, with a need to develop a market, yet introducing products that poison the waters because they don't. Our favorite expression is none of this SHIT works until we make it work. That's how we've gotten to be really good friends with a lot of the sensor companies. There's a lot of learning. I don't say that punitively. It's just very early. But I see it stalling out in the absence of player contracts that integrate how it's going to be handled. I don't see it really gaining traction in professional sports until some of these labor issues and governance issues actually get solved. And I think I would just really encourage companies. It needs to be interoperable. Everybody talks about big data, but where are these data feeds? Unless you're living at the league, take the NBA, for instance. And the league is actually collecting injury on all the players. They're collecting actual performance during games. They're doing yearly stress tests. So unless all this data feeds into them, I'm not saying it should, you'll never be able to make that big data discovery because otherwise you're just in a team with a few guys. You're not making the big observation. So how is all that data going to get together? Everybody talks about it, but they don't have it. And any company that tells me we're never going to show it to you, and it doesn't belong to the player, I'm like, get out of here. I don't want it to even test your widget because you've got some short-term ridiculous business model that isn't going to change the world in any way. I mean, and there's been no home run product. Somebody tell me what the home run product is now. I don't think there is one that shows the world this is what it could be,
Yeah, and Sports Innovation Lab, we're actually going to try to sort of create a competitive analysis because to both your points, there's a ton of these companies popping up and consolidation is sort of what we're starting to see in the market. But to be able to understand, you have the benefit of having USC Center, you can test the sensors, but not everyone has that opportunity to really know what the difference are in the market. Maybe Meredith, with your company, I mean, you're venture backed, you saw an opportunity in the space, you're trying to solve a problem, hydration. How did you go about that? Like, what, you want to help obviously in this space, and just tell us a little bit about why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and I'm going to riff off what Sandra and Leslie have
Riff
brought
away.
up. In the sense that, we're talking about fragmentation and sort of no one's really kind of hit the home run yet. And this feeds right into my biggest fear about sports tech, specifically revolving around the quantified athlete. And that is that companies are raising 50, 60, $100 million to come up with some new algorithmic derivation of heart rate to bring about some metric that only LeBron James and Tom Brady care about, and at a price point that only they can afford. And what my fear is that investors, because there hasn't been a big win, they're going to sour to the market. So, there's a lot of these companies raising hundreds of millions up to billions of dollars, year over year now, and no one's really been able to hit it out of the park. And I think a big part of that is, when we think about, let's say, for example, the Tom Brady example, 32 teams and 2,000 athletes is not a market. It's an influencer strategy. And there's a problem to solve there, but that's not a market in and of itself. So I think a lot of these technologies that are thinking about elite athletes is a great place to start. There are actual problems to solve there. But if you can find a metric and a problem to solve for the amateur athlete that extends, something so fundamental like hydration, if that's a problem that you can solve, there's enormous potential there.
Goes to like corporate wellness as well. So I mean, we have a
Absolutely.
huge effort around corporate wellness. If you understand hydration, sleep, that affects your productivity every day. So you start with sports, and you can go to these adjacent markets to kind of continue to build your business and then invest in R&D.
Absolutely. And I would say one more extension off of that is anything that's relevant to a high-performing athlete is relevant to a soldier. So, and beyond that to a laborer. So this is where I'm kind of excited to see you're saying about the workplace. I mean, think about, we here at Harvard Business School don't always sit and think about sort of the 90% of the country doing manual labor work. And there's major opportunities and major safety and performance impairments that are happening as a result of hydration, whether you're a firefighter, a construction worker, a miner, or a delivery man for UPS.
That's interesting. So I'm the global chair of the IOC Athletes Commission, and as an athlete myself, was mentioning whether it's sleep, hydration, steps, calorie. I mean, you're trying to aggregate all this big information. And Dr. Saxon talked about there's privacy issues with that. So you want to measure everything. There's broad appeal to the mass market, but maybe Sean, you could talk about when you're working with your players. And this great new tech comes up, but it's unproven, but it's making these grand promises, but they're intimidated by where that data could go. Like, what is the push pull internally when deciding to work with a company? I'm sure you get pitched all the time, knowing that it could help your players, but could also potentially harm you when it comes to player contracts or broadcasters wanting that data, or, betting agencies saying, oh, I'd love to hear what, this player's heart rate is. Like, tell us a little bit about the data itself and how that's impacting your job.
Yeah, I think for us, we're always excited to test the tech that's coming in, that especially if it can solve maybe a specific problem that we have as a staff or an organization. But we have to set the expectation to what it can actually deliver to us. And I think that's something that a lot of people in professional sports have suffered the consequences, that they were provided certain technologies, and Leslie and I have talked about this at length with all these various technologies coming across our desk that haven't been validated, or their data sets aren't reliable. And so there's an expectation in terms of this one metric is not the fix-all to all your problems. It just maybe can answer this one specific problem, and as we enrich that data set with other information, that maybe will give us a more clear vision. And I think that's one thing in terms of a coach to athlete interaction, that expectation needs to be communicated very early on, because if the athlete or the coach loses trust in this technology, you will never get back in the door again as a company, as well as these are very small communities and they talk. So if you want to kill your business very fast, overcommit and under or overpromise and underdeliver, and that will definitely happen. Because in the end of the day, a coach that may have been, worked his entire career just like that athlete to get to the NFL and the NBA or whatever, they're putting their name on this technology, and if it is unreliable or something that the athlete doesn't believe in, or is gives a different or completely a reading that isn't consistent with how the athlete feels, it will, again, athletes won't want to use it for that fact, because they're not always sure where that information is going to lead to. Is this going to go up to front office or the head coach? How is this going to impact their career and their future within the organization as well? So I think setting the expectation in terms of what the technology can deliver, what problem you're trying to solve, an open dialogue between the athlete and coach, and then also getting an understanding of what the limitations are up in the organization, so that there isn't too much vested interest into one specific technology or metric.
The other thing that I think is interesting to articulate, and Isaiah's talked about it, Sean talks about it, Paul Robbins, who's here, is, okay, what are you trying to solve for? Overtraining, undertraining, getting deconditioned during a season, and how does your technology solve for it? And how does it relate to, say, player tracking? Some of this stuff isn't fully leveraged. We don't really know enough about player tracking yet. What if that's enough? What if simply player tracking in the NBA solves the problem of undertraining or deconditioning during the season? I don't know. But why are we using other stuff if we haven't fully leveraged that? The other piece, if I were innovating what we think about in the space when we're trying to create our own IP, is early measures. By the time you're injured, maybe it's too late. By the time the athlete has pain, by the time he's been concussed or she's been concussed. So what's a pre-concussive measure where you could rest a player in a pre-concussive state for a time before they get concussed, and then they never potentially get TBI or anything like that? Okay, well, let's say you even do invent that thing. How's it going to change the culture of, say, football? Maybe you need twice as many players because you're resting guys all the time. They don't play a quarter if you've got this really sensitive measure of pre-concuss. So sometimes you work yourself into these states with the tech where you figure it out, but then you're going to completely change the culture. It won't fit into warfighting or warfighting training, even though that's the solution to that problem. That changes the culture of that unit too much that they can't even do their main job. So it gets really nuanced.
Sandra, you mentioned AI is something that the industry should focus on. What are the big limitations that you're seeing to getting to that point in time where we do have true predictive performance, where you can understand an injury before it happens, where you can, predict an athlete's performance on the field? I mean, that's something we've seen. There aren't that many companies that are able to do that yet. Again, as the industry consolidates and works together. But what is something you're seeing? We talked about data privacy.
It's there. I mean, so Intel, so we power the financial institutions, and we power mostly the World Wide Web, right? So I always say, like, a day without Intel, you don't have Facebook, you don't have Google. And so for our standpoint is we recognized way in advance the importance of data. And so we've invested and acquired in companies that are going to drive cognitive learning, where you can implement the solution, and it doesn't take years to implement, and you can take a lot of the data. And I think one of the challenges with artificial intelligence is that you need a wide set of data. So you just can't start with athlete tracking. What about you to have athlete tracking, weather conditions, elevation? All of those data points could possibly impact the overall workload. So it's sitting there and partnering with, the Players Association and the athletes and figuring out, let's take all these data sets, let's make some hypothesis. It's never been done before, right? So we got to anticipate, and I absolutely agree with Leslie, that in some cases, we may have not realized the full potential of some existing data sets, but you need a lot of data. And I think getting to real time and then delivering data in a way that it matters to a trainer versus an athlete versus a coach, and really sitting there and thinking about authentication and the whole thing, security. I was having a conversation with a team, and security should be the very first part of the conversation. Like, what is your security policy? We're very committed to security, and put that into the architecture of the overall roadmap, and ultimately protecting the athlete. And so solutions are there. You have to think about some cases they're really heavy, and that may not be the right solution for some teams or organizations. But ultimately, we sit there and we have these conversations like, what are you trying to get done? What do you have today? How do we leverage the investments you've already made? Let's leverage those data sets, and let's exploit the potential and start to add artificial intelligence. So my point of view is it's already here. It's now just about being willing to adopt. And with technology, and any technology, there's risk associated. And if you're going to wait for it to be perfect, technology is never perfect. That's why we have version 1, version 2, version 3, and we continuously iterate. So that's really important, to be open-minded and join us on the journey and help us iterate, help provide input, because that's how we're going to deliver the best-in-class solutions for the sports industry.
That's fantastic. So you talk about working together. We have an array of people on this panel. How do you guys think the industry work together to get to that point faster? Wondering if anyone has a perspective on, hey, I've had a limitation before. I see Meredith shaking her head, but if the industry would simply work together like any good team, how could we get there sooner?
Yeah, I think one of the connections that I'd love to see more collaboration is we're looking at a lot of technologies that are looking at, I'm going to put biometrics in quotes because my background's actually in life sciences, so I'm going to look to Dr. Saxon here to intervene as a doctor here and give some perspective. But I would love to see more of these technologies and these wearables using true chemical and molecular biomarkers. I think there's an accuracy there that we can link into. Navigating the FDA gets a little bit tricky depending on what you're trying to do with your device, but I think there's a level potentially of accuracy and reliability that we could tap into. But that's a tough collaboration as we start to bring the medical field, athletic trainers, doctors, performance specialists, together with technologists and teams. I think there's a lot of collaborations that are working really nicely, but one shortage, I think, is, and what Next is trying to do, is looking to bring actual, what we consider more traditional medical biometrics into these technologies. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the technology's there, but you have to, it's just so humbling. I hate to be Debbie Downer, but it's like, so we have all this regulated stuff we're using in athletes. So we have continuous glucose and lactate. Oh, how amazing. Now we're going to do high circuit intensity training. And then I'm like, oh, gee, I don't know what this means because I've never seen continuous lactate and glucose. I know when somebody's reaching anaerobic threshold, I have that in just our heart rate data, USC water polo player, complete heart block all night. I'm worried this kid gets drunk one night, he's going to drop dead. I can't keep him from, I just have to sit there and it keeps me up at night. I have nothing to benchmark it to. So all these things we have to collect for a while and then benchmark to events that we know are significant. Then we'll start to understand it. It doesn't mean that the earliest people doing the discovery, I think, are going to have the advantage and be smarter. But it takes a while to even know what it all means when you're collecting it. And then I have to go back to experts and say, well, you've been doing performance science for a long time. What does this mean to you? This guy, we see players with what you're talking about is really important. There's physiologic monitoring, there's player tracking, then there's this whole unexplored metabolic monitoring that we need to really get down on and figure out. And that's possible now. And you can swipe it with your phone and see it, but what does it mean? What does it mean for that player? So I don't know, but it's a fun field to work in, and the bar is low because you can really discover a lot. You just have to be patient. I don't know what it means to rapid product to market. But hydration is great because it's a huge problem, right? And once you figure it out, you're too late. So if you can get there early,
I think the key is how do we keep folks like Sandra engaged and wanting to fund these sort of initiatives, because I do fear that the venture industry is going to fatigue of it.
Sean, since you're in the elite space, you've dealt with Navy SEALs, you're working with NFL players, and you could talk to the Intels out there, the big companies that are investing, the Nixes that are trying to solve these problems. What are the problems that you think are the most pertinent for the athletes, the elite athletes? Because I say that because I believe if the elite athletes start, I think, Meredith, you mentioned this, it'll trickle down to the mass market, all the weekend warriors, all the moms and dads, and will help solve a broader problem. But what are the things that the market will go towards on the elite side?
I think the establishing those benchmarks by individual is key, because everyone's different in those domains, and their training history, their genetics, all those things play into it. So a lot of these canned reporting aspects that technologies offer often don't apply to our population or another population, whether it's in the NBA or the weekend warrior. So I think that's one thing that is something that constantly creates conflict with introducing these technologies, because you may flag an individual that doesn't deserve to be flagged because his genetics or training or whatever has rendered him outside of the normative population. I think that's one thing. The other thing from us, from a professional sports or the SEAL teams or whatever, if it adds more time and more staffing and all these different things, professional sports is they're measured by wins and losses, and many of these people do not have. They're renting lockers basically in the facility, and so having technologies that consume a resource of time, something they're already starved of, it's another huge roadblock in the industry. And so sometimes I think that we're focused on trying to give this futuristic response to our training data, where we would be the technology would be adopted much quicker if it could somehow eliminate or accelerate some of our processes we currently have. I think some of those things some of the traditions in sport are sometimes, we turn to them, but there's a reason why they're a tradition. They've worked over time. But if we could maybe expedite some of those traditions and get that information quicker, it would be much earlier adopted by the coaching staffs, performance staffs.
But in response to you, like, technology in every single industry is forcing people to kind of reimagine what it could look like in the future, right? So I do think, so we believe technology, how do you integrate it seamlessly? But there's new roles that are being created. So like data scientists like Shane Battier, like he was just announced, right? So I do think keep with the tradition, but you also need to look ahead, like other industries. You take the automobile industry and how the autonomous driving machine, they've had to reimagine how to be a tech company. I like to look at the Warriors and how they're leveraging technology as a competitive advantage. So from our perspective, we do believe, okay, there's tradition, but you have to be willing to explore a little bit more to ultimately, the athlete wants to win, the team wants to win, and the league wants to win. So how do you use tech for your advantage, recognizing that there's some processes that are gonna have to change, and being open to that, and yet it's our responsibility in the tech industry is how do we create it in a way that's seamless, frictionless, and it's easy to adopt, so it doesn't take it's gonna take an athlete 10 minutes to put it on. It's already integrated into the apparel, for example.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, and there's some coaches and staff that are more open to new ideas than others. But a lot of these guys, they're so ingrained in their intuitive responses to whether it's training an athlete or watching a player on film or whatever, and to get those individuals to adopt, it needs to somewhat either confirm or extend beyond what they already know. And sometimes that's the issue with some of the tech, is it just confirms what they already thought. They didn't need to put this extra time in of putting that technology on the player and then dealing with, answering all the questions when they already knew the answer from years of being in the business.
That's a great point. What every technology maker in this room should say to themselves: when you introduce your product, anybody who uses it has to say, I thought it was this way, but your technology taught me it was something else. It has to light bulb them. And if your technology can do that, it adds value. And if it can say to a busy bunch of people, only focus on these guys or these players, because don't wait, all these guys are okay. Where it creates that efficiency or that enlightenment. Yep. Otherwise, what are you doing?
Do you think the sports industry as a whole is slower to adopt change than other industries? I mean, is that because, my perspective, look, we're suddenly seeing tech pop up everywhere globally. And I'm just wondering, to your point, Sean, if you're a coach and you make these great calls and you're winning games by intuition, is that a roadblock, the industry as a whole not understanding how tech can help, or do they get it and they're just anxious to adopt ones that are accurate and are actually going to make change?
I would say they get it. The guys that can reproduce it year in and year out and win, they're very specific in what problems they need to solve. They ask better questions than other people, and then they find the solutions to those questions. And and then again, I think that one of the biggest resources that these staffs don't have is time. Uh, I mean, our coaches probably average 4 hours of sleep a night. And so if you're going to put more information on their desk besides what they already have coming at them, um, it's less it's not going to be it's less likely to be used. So and I feel like a lot of there have been a lot of positions created in organizations, but those individuals still they're even though they're in the organization, not all their information's adopted yet, because I feel like the more that the information is kind of gets black boxy outside, where the coach cannot trace where this information or how you're acquiring this information, the less likely the coaches will adopt it. So I think if you can extend what's beyond what a coach already intuitively can see, or eliminates or effectively kind of accelerates the process that's already in place, I think there now the window becomes open that they will adopt it, and then you can expand upon that. But if you come in with too many futuristic ideas that they're not sure where you're getting them and and it's just going to create more work, it's not going to.
I was going to give you one industry that I think we should learn from, because I support it too. It's the retail industry. And, they had very similar conversations where the merchant, the buyer didn't have time to add additive technology, and they have been completely disrupted by tech, and they're figuring it out and they're playing catch up. And so I think the good thing about Intel is we support multiple industries. And so how are we taking some of the best practices in retail and what worked and what didn't, the financial institutions and real-time security and the criticality of delivering data is bringing those practices into sports. So I do think there's some industries out there that have been slow to adopt, and if you read in the headlines every day, they're struggling because they weren't open to different ideas, and so now a lot of them are playing catch up, and I don't know if some of them are going to exist moving forward. So I think that it's always great to learn from other industries and sit down and have conversations of what worked, what didn't, as we're looking to transform industries such as sports and the automobile and et cetera.
Sometimes I think we're approaching it from the opposite direction. What if it's really all about the fan experience? And as the fan experience is really being questioned and people are looking at stuff on different screens, not going to stadiums, what if one of these biometric solutions or player tracking creates such an engaging fan experience that everything else gets pulled along? Then the revenue's there, then the players shut up, everybody shuts up because everybody's making money, and then it all just starts to happen, and then the science just tags along. Then you have the discovery. It's not this like pulling teeth, do the science first. And sports feels like a really good opportunity for that, since there are so many challenges, particularly to professional sports now, on all these things. Stadium of the future, all the stuff, player pipelines. There are so many things that are kind of in question now with a lot of professional sports and changing. So maybe it's just, think about a tech experience that translates. Yeah, it's on the player, but it's really about
it's
the
a
fan.
really
It's really about revenue for the
It's an excellent point, because I think everyone here is trying to do something. We're talking about on the elite athlete side, but to what end? We're talking about performance. Maybe that applies, obviously, performance for everyone. But if the data itself and the that's going to come off of these different products will help with fan engagement, will help with stadium experience, will boost profits for the teams and the players and the broadcasters and the sponsors. I mean, that's whatever. I just came back from Switzerland, where the betting industry is like on fire, because they're going, give me more data. Like, there's all these separate industries that could benefit, including the players, to the data. And does anyone have any thoughts? I think it's a good point of what should lead the way? Should it be the elite athletes? Should it be focusing on the tech solutions that apply to the average person? Should it be the data so that it pushes the broadcasters or the media?
I think if you're thinking about building a sustainable business, it has to be whatever's driving the most value for who the decision maker is. Athletes are decision makers on their own in different ways, but if you're looking at selling a product to a team and Sean's your decision maker, then your athlete is a stakeholder, but not necessarily your decision maker.
So we're talking about it from a team, but should the industry, maybe Sandra from Intel, I mean, you're going to be able to mass produce and help more than just the few elite athletes that this device will go on or this solution will go on. So how do you think about, targeting, again, the weekend warriors that love putting on an inaccurate device that gives them some proxy for steps is actually sort of motivating them to do better, but they don't need all the bells and whistles. They don't need the tech to be super accurate.
It's all intertwined. I mean, this is why the sports group has a group focused on delivering fan experiences, and we have human performance, and they all feed into each other. So we recently did a research on if we were to take the pro athlete, what do consumers or the everyday kid that's playing, what would he or she like to know? And they're like, well, I want to train like a pro. I want to be able to train like maybe a Tom Brady, but maybe if you have your information about your body and your biometric, maybe it should be Aaron Rodgers, and providing that information and that guidance. Of course, you have to go through, the athlete, but you can maybe do it at, the top 10 quarterbacks at an aggregate level. So there's train like a pro. You have the notion of, look, around the world, everybody is a fan of basketball, football, and so China is doubling down and investing in American sports. I want to have front row access to potentially, a basketball game, and so there's where virtual reality comes into play. And so we've acquired a company around virtual reality and bringing that into the overall experience, but it's just not the video and the visual experience. But what about if you can add data to it? And so then it kind of changes the broadcaster in terms of storytelling. So you have this additional data set. How do you tell stories around it that is continuously and always engaging? So from our standpoint, I mean, we're very fortunate that we're able to, because we have these two groups, to look at the synergies between the two and look at, scouting the next talent. We're seeing it obviously in China, where they're looking at wearables for the young kids and can they identify the next gold medalist. And honestly, for us, we're just sitting there like, how do we do that too? So there's so many applications when we're talking about the quantified self that can get applied to different parts of the sports business. So we don't look at it as an either or, it's an and I think ultimately it's, are we delivering value, right? So that fundamentally the challenge with Silicon Valley is like we like to create technology for technology's sake, making sure that we are sitting there with our engineers and the athletes and the Players Association and having conversations and the broadcasters. What problem can we really solve, and are we adding value? And ultimately, that's what our focus is on in terms of adding value to the entire sports ecosystem.
Yeah, I think to riff off that, I mean, bring it back to the health industry again. I mean, the entire, if you think about the wearables and the quantified athlete movement as sort of diagnostic in nature, the entire value of medical diagnostics is the so what. What did I learn from the data? What am I going to do differently? What decision am I going to make differently? What money am I going to save, or injury am I going to prevent, or health crisis am I going to avert by making a different decision based on this data, either in real time or from latent analytics? And that's where I think the value is going to be driven.
I would say they're very different populations. Working with special operations warfighters than trying to solve a problem we're working with just a Marine battalion right now that's going to deploy in a year and a half, and they're completely different problem sets. The battalion, 65% of America can't get in the Army. Cheryl Mello's here because of their academic, criminal, or obesity history. So then you're left with the average 45% guy who's 19 years old. He's just an average guy, and you're trying to train him up to go to do a deployment. Completely different problem set than a special operations training thing. So, and an elite athlete versus a regular delusional person who wants to be is a completely, from a medical standpoint, completely different problem set. So I think they are. I don't know, Sean. I think they're very different to solve for me, just doing research.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's where it comes back to the AI component of having this built in, so whatever technology you're using, that it can learn and identify who that individual is, and then set the biometric parameters based on who they are as an individual.
Yeah, I mean, if you can identify the people at the margins who just are at risk in where on a nuclear submarine, who's going to get depressed and be near, whatever, you can just like these things of kind of identify people at risk on the margins of things is a really interesting area that does apply a little more broadly. Who's about to
That's a
fall
good part of a good point there with the risk is one of the things. I feel like with a lot of technologies, they have adopted this green, yellow, red light kind of icon, which sometimes creates more questions than what it's worth.
The ambiguity.
Yeah, ambiguity. So just tell me who's at risk. How can I automate this whole process or eliminate so I don't have to pay attention to these individuals and triage the individuals that I'm really concerned about?
Great. So we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. If anything's coming in on the hashtag quantified athlete, we could also take those. So we'll start here.
So I heard Sandra talk about the data fusion problem, solving that, and I heard Sean talking about the adoption issue. These issues remind me of what the National Weather Service has done, where every meteorologist has their own proprietary model. I mean, I think they're the only federal agency where the employees get a grade at the end of the year as to how well they did at picking the weather. So is the future then for your industry, Sean, to have a coach who's been trained on how to use these proprietary or trade secret models to incorporate and solve this data fusion problem?
I mean, I think it eventually does come out in wins and losses. I mean, we have other processes in place in terms of performance gains throughout the year based on our key indicators by athlete, by position, injuries, all those things. There's different processes in place within the organization. The same thing from self-scouting, even from one draft class to the next, self-scouting to see 3 years down the road how we had an individual ranked versus where he actually ended up as a player in the NFL. So yeah, and then it all comes out in the end. It's pretty easy. Who has the most wins is doing it the best.
Another question? On the back in the green.
So you've talked a lot about the fragmentation of the market and different technologies, but also the industry needing to be open, and then the differences of big companies and small companies. How do you see IP or intellectual property holding back the industry or fueling the industry from sort of people being protective of the technologies that they create versus like opening up for us to learn from each other?
Look, the biggest and best technology companies in the world have open APIs. And if you're not secure enough to do that, to me, get out of here. Because I don't like the secret sauce bullhoney and let us pay $30,000 for my widget. Because that's your business model. For me, I just find it really obnoxious. And I think it retards growth. How are you ultimately going to succeed with that?
Yeah, I would say from a user, we do not align with companies that come in with that approach. Because if you only have one, we're not in this together. We're in it for the next good idea and the next good idea and the next good idea. So when we sense that in individuals or companies that are trying to get us to test their technology, that's something that we will cease to work with them if they're not open about what they're doing, and then obviously if they won't assist in us trying to get to a common ground in terms of where we feel the technology needs to go.
It's digital. It's interoperability, integration, standard communications. Let everybody build on your platform if it's that good.
I think from the innovator's perspective, the way we think about it at Nix is protect the widget, protect the product. If somebody can sense exactly what we're trying to sense in the exact same way, we don't have a scalable business. So if we can protect that, and our patents come out of the Harvard School of Engineering here, and we protect that widget really carefully, the data needs to be open and available, or we're not going to be able to partner.
Another question?
At the end of the day, this is all about the money. I get that we're trying to protect the athlete with all this data and the information, we can make better decisions. But if you follow the money trail, starting with the advertiser who pays the broadcaster, who pays the league, who pays the teams, who pays the play, and it goes down that line. If you could get a representative from all of these stakeholders to sit in a room and decide how they could fairly divvy up the money, we could bring the cost of these sensor technologies way down and start fueling the younger generation to get them to have these wearable devices generating lots of data, which behooves the bigger teams, the NCAA, D1 schools, because that's the feeding ground of the athlete of the future. If you start following a kid in 8th grade and say that he's the standout athlete, let's follow him, we can bring that cost down so high schools can afford the technology and a data science element to all of this. How do you feel about that kind of logic, if you will?
Maybe this is optimistic, but I think that's starting. I mean, we've got the Eagles, we've got the Intel, we've got USC, we've got Harvard. I mean, these are all different constituencies that are participating in some way. Well, no, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, those are the groups that are underrepresented here. But I think if we think about the traditional path of innovation, corporate money and sort of non-traditional paths of money, I think, are cropping up more in the sports tech industry than ever before in any other industry. There's always been good corporate strategic money, depending on the industry, but we've got money flowing in from team owners, from athletes themselves, from people that now have not just a sort of a passion project interest, but yeah, can we get advertisers and broadcasters? Maybe. Let's see what happens if
Isn't
ESPN
the
sets up
Innovation Lab is pulling everything together? That's an example of bringing the entire ecosystem under one roof.
I think, yeah, that's the goal at least, because everyone might have the same objective, but understanding, again, how do you bring that group together, that ecosystem, to have it make sense? And yeah, if you can start to think through, I think, the financials of it and see how everyone would benefit. I mean, it's collaboration, I think, at the end of the day.
And Intel, I mean, going back to, because we have the fan experience and we have athlete and we've added to broadcast, we did it at Super Bowl. My only ask of everybody is we have to be open. Like, I heard the notion of tradition. Well, this is how we do it. Well, this is how we do it. Well, the world's changing around us. Like, let's think about different business models and think about different ways of how, look, we're all want to make money. And so it's about getting together in a room. Sometimes I feel like it's a separation of church and state. So one group doesn't talk to the other group. I mean, we need help, right? So Intel's trying to bring these groups together, but I can experience the separation of church and state. Like, we got to sit down together and figure it out because they're all interdependent.
If you're an athletic department trying to compete for the best athletes and your athletes are seeing all this tech before they go to college, you better have some tech, because they're not going to want to come and play for you unless. So I think your idea about getting it out there in the popular culture and people, then other people have to adopt it, because
That's why we're starting this conversation, and specifically why we brought different viewpoints to the table today and in this conference. The quantified athlete is about the future. It takes a team. It takes the investors and the startups and the industry players, the leagues, the universities. I mean, everyone has a stake in this. So it's a really good point. With that, are there any questions from quantified athlete? Maybe we'll take one, or are we ready to move on? All right, we'll pause. I just want to take a second. Thank you for being here. Really interesting insights. A round of applause.